Next, we screw the original Chevette sender into the opposite end. The nipple is screwed into the hole that the original unit was removed from and is carefully tightened. Finally, working from the front, the new sending unit that came with our gauge set is threaded into the opening of the brass fitting. We connect the original wire to the Chevette sender. Later, we will connect a new wire to the second unit. Since our Chevette shift lever will be installed in a new location, farther back from the transmission than the original location, we must lengthen the shift rod. Instead of extending the shift rod, we prefer to have a new rod made to the correct length, or we can obtain one from the factory. After we have removed the original fitting from the stock rod and threaded it on the new one, we remove the retaining clip from the transmission and slide the old rod out. The stud is removed from the old rod and installed in our new longer piece. Then, we simply install the new rod onto the transmission lever. We will secure the rod to the rear of the transmission with a tie wrap to keep it out of the way as we install the engine. Moving to the front of our chassis, we are now ready to install the engine and transmission. Here we have a type of engine lift that can be rented from most local rental stores. We've securely fastened a chain to the front and rear of the engine, making certain that the chain is of sufficient strength to support the weight. Many engines will have lifting hooks. These are really L-shaped brackets with holes through them. A chain is passed through the holes or a hook is attached. Either way, the important thing is to have a chain of sufficient diameter and strength to support the engine, and that is securely fastened. Slowly, we lower the engine while we push it to the rear, guiding the transmission under the battery box. This is not a difficult task, and while having someone to assist us would be helpful, it really isn't necessary. A little patience is all that's required. Although this is the most convenient type of engine lift to use, there are other types which will work just as well, just so it's sturdy and intended for the job. We want to engage the hole in the motor mount brackets mounted to each side of the engine onto the studs on the rubber motor mounts. When the motor mounts are in their proper position, we thread the original nuts onto the studs. However, at this point we do not tighten them fully. Next, we roll our floor jack under the transmission. Slowly, we elevate the transmission so the mounting studs on the bottom are slightly above the bottom of the main frame rails. We can now remove our hoist and roll it out of the way. Our Chevette transmission crossmember has been cleaned and painted. We now place it into position against the bottom of the mounting brackets that are part of our new frame. When the holes have been aligned, we insert 5/16 inch diameter by 1 1/4 inch long bolts with flat washers, lock washers, and nuts. The correct tools are used to fully tighten the bolts. Now we slowly lower our floor jack, allowing the two studs on the transmission mount to pass through the mounting holes in the transmission cross member. From below, the original nuts are threaded onto the studs and tightened with the appropriate socket and ratchet. Now we move to the side of the engine and securely tighten the motor mount nut. We repeat this on the opposite side. The original Chevette drive shaft is too long to fit into our new chassis. Shortening the unit is best left to a professional. Checking our yellow pages, we locate a shop that can handle the job. Before we send the unit out, we must determine the correct measurements. We insert the drive shaft yoke onto the transmission shaft, pushing it forward, allowing 1 or 2 inches of play before the yoke bottoms out against the transmission. Using a tape measure, we find the distance between the center of the front universal and the center of the bearing recess on the rear companion flange of the axle extension. Taking the drive shaft to the shop we've located, we give them the measurements. At the same time, they will balance the shortened shaft and check the universal joints. When the drive shaft returns, it's ready to install. The splined yoke is slipped onto the transmission shaft, then we push forward on the drive shaft and slide the rear universal cups into the recessed areas on the companion flange of the rear axle extension. We gently tap the shaft to firmly seat the universal. Once this has been done, we install the original straps and bolts. Using the appropriate wrench, we secure the drive shaft to the rear axle extension. Installation of the steering is our next step. A tape measure is used and a line is marked 4 inches below the mounting flange on the steering column shaft. We find that the measurement works better than the measurement found in the manual. In some cases, we find it's necessary to slightly trim the plastic bushing at the end of the housing for proper brake pedal clearance. We check the position of the column in the car first. Supporting the column carefully in a vise, we use a hacksaw to make the cuts. When we trim the plastic, we are very careful not to cut into the column. In order to connect the steering column to the rack and pinion assembly, we have to fabricate an extension. The original Chevette column is too short. Since there is a new way of making the extension that differs slightly from earlier drawings, the factory has an addendum to the instruction manual available. First, we obtain 24 inches of solid round 3/4 inch steel shaft, along with 12 inches of 7/8 inch solid round. We use the 7/8 inch material for the upper portion of our extension. As outlined in our instruction manual, it is necessary to have both ends machined. We were fortunate to find a Chevette with a tilt steering column, which alters our upper measurement slightly over what the standard column would be. 2 high-quality universal joints were obtained. The lower universal has a 1-inch bore in one end and a 3/4 inch bore in the other. The upper universal has a 3/4 inch bore in both ends. When we picked up our universals, we also picked up 2 pillow block bearings with 3/4 inch bores. Once we have all the pieces properly laid out, we check the fit on the car. We then have all joints pinned and welded, making certain that the pillow block bearings are on the lower shaft. A complete unit already welded is available from the factory. Normally, before the extension is installed, we weld the lower tip of the steering column to our new extension. The 1-inch round end at the rear slides into the lower universal joint. Here, for ease of visibility, we are demonstrating how the flange that is bolted to the tip is attached to the flexible coupling disc on the rack and pinion assembly. The 2 original Chevette nuts are used to secure the flange. Earlier, we thoroughly inspected the rubber coupling disc. Had it shown any signs of wear or deterioration, we would have replaced it. We slide our steering extension into place, aligning the pillow block bearings with the support plates on the frame. We then use our electric drill with a 3/8 inch bit to drill a temporary hole to secure one of the bearings. Our Chevette steering column has been cleaned and painted. The column is placed in position, sliding the upper end of the steering extension into the steering column shaft. The lower column mounting tab is extended to the firewall side of the lower frame mount bracket. A 5/16 inch diameter by 1 1/4 inch long bolt, along with a flat washer, lock washer, and nut, are used to secure the lower mounting brackets. We then raise the top of the steering column, so the upper mounting bracket holes of the column are aligned underneath the holes in the steering column support brace that is part of the frame. Either 5/16 inch or 3/8 inch diameter bolts are used to secure the column, along with flat washers, lock washers, and nuts, and securely tightened. Before we finish, we drill a 5/16 inch hole through the steering column shaft and extension and secure the 2 pieces together with a grade 8 bolt. Later, before the car is driven any distance, we will have the joint welded for added security. Holes are drilled for the pillow block bearings when they are properly aligned with the supports welded onto the frame. In this case, we have used a 3/8 inch bit to drill the holes because of the size of the bearing mount holes. 4 3/8 inch diameter by 1 1/2 inch long bolts with flat washers, lock washers, and nuts are installed and fully tightened. Our steering column is now installed.